Hi, my name is Sakura. I am the art educator at Kids Quest Children's Museum. And today I'm going to show you one of my favorite activities of all time, which is painting. Now, with painting, just keep in mind that it's obviously probably going to be pretty messy, so don't dress your child in all white. Now, when it comes down to setup, obviously, I feel like a lot of us have this preconceived notion that painting involves white paper, a brush, and some paint, which, I wouldn't say is wrong, but today we are going to do painting with everything except for paintbrushes. And this is especially great because if your kid is really young, less than 3 years old, they can still do this activity. A lot of people come into the art studio and they're like, oh, my kid is too young for this, but no kid is ever too young to do art, especially painting. So we have all sorts of fun materials today. We have some Q-tips. We have some buttons of different shapes, sizes, and colors. We have some feathers, which are really, really fun. And then we have some mini imagination playground. If you've been in the museum before, you might have played with our big blocks, but it doesn't really have to be any of these materials specifically. You can really use anything that you have at home as long as it's washable and doesn't really stain. So that really gives you a lot of different options besides paintbrushes, as long as you just sort of open your mind to what painting could be. Now, when it comes down to the setup, how you set this up is going to determine how your kid interacts with the activity. So, of course, different kinds of paper is going to affect how your kid paints. So you can see we have different sizes. These are quarter sheets. We have manila and black. We have a half sheet of white paper. And then we have your regular 8.5 by 11 sizes of different colors. So depending on your focus or depending on what your kid wants to do, you can do everything from small painting to big, medium size. I know not everyone has a butcher roll of paper at home, but if you do have that or any kind of bigger paper, that's always really fun to use as well. Now, when it comes to paint, I would say the paint that we have is it's washable, which means it's water soluble and it's non-toxic. I feel like most kids' paint is going to be like this, but just make sure if your kid is younger and they put everything in their mouth, that you definitely make sure it's non-toxic. That way, if they do put it in their mouth, it's not as big of a deal. So you can really use anything when it comes to containers. Obviously, we have a lot of different stuff here at the museum. So we have this palette, right? We have little flower paint palettes here. We have our regular palette. You can even just use a bowl or a plate as long as you don't mind that gets dirty, because obviously paint washes off. So just make sure you don't leave it. That's the only thing I would say. So today, I think I am going to use our bowl here because I feel like this is most likely what you're going to have at home, which is a bowl or a plate. Now, of course, you can give your kid a paintbrush. That's totally fine. But if you want to try something different, you can use any of the sort of materials that I mentioned, right? So one really fun one that I like to do is using black paper and using some feathers. And then you can use some white paint or something that's sort of brighter, and you can use that and you can sort of paint with this material, right? Because I feel like this is not something that you would normally think of using to paint. And that's a lot of fun. You can see the sort of effects that it has and all sorts of different, color mixing that happens and things like that. Now, if your kid is a little bit younger, that's totally fine. One thing, white is always a lot of fun. And if you do have a lot of different colors, then that can get really fun with color mixing and things like that. So just feel free to give your kid or your child or your baby a little block, right? And you can sort of it acts sort of like a stamp, right? You can use different sort of shapes. If you have any straws at home, this is a really fun one. Right, and you can create all sorts of different effects or sort of stamping motions with these sort of stamps, and definitely with the straws, that's a fun one also. And then let's say your kid is maybe a little bit older, right? Like, how would you engage them with paint? Well, one way that I always think is really fun is contrasting or color mixing if your kid is a little older. So for example, if you're, you know how colors work, red and yellow make orange and etc. Then I would say try to give them different colored paper and give them a challenge, like, what kind of scene could be made on a yellow piece of paper versus what kind of scene could be made on a blue piece of paper, right? And then that's when you really start to engage their creativity, because they think, oh, blue, maybe you start to think ocean, right? Give them some Q-tips, and you can be like, hey, what kind of scene can you make with a blue piece of paper? And then they can go in and be like, I think it would be fun to create sort of an ocean scene. Right, we could add some starfish in there. Maybe some fish. Right, so it doesn't necessarily have to be for younger kids. You can find different ways. So like if you're a little older, you can use colored pieces of paper work really well. You can give them a challenge like, how many different colors can you make with 3 colors, and then just give them 3 sets of colors. You could encourage an older kid, like go and find a bunch of things in the house to paint with that you think would be fun to paint with, and then it can become sort of like a treasure hunt or a scavenger hunt, or things like that. You could give them a bunch of colors along with black and white paint. You could say, hey, like if you add white to a color versus black to a color, how does that change how it looks, right? So there's different ways that you can engage different levels of kids with this sort of stuff. And of course, kids are going to be learning, if they're younger, there's going to be lots of cause and effect. I add one color to another color, what sort of happens? I use blocks instead of Q-tips. What sort of effect is it going to make? So they're learning color contrasting, color mixing, cause and effect. All sorts of fun sort of things are happening while they're having fun and not realizing that they're learning, which is really awesome. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, we are at Kids Quest CM on YouTube, so feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And we're going to be having more activities by all of our educators. We will see you soon.